G'day guys, Rukshan here. Thanks for joining me for the news vlog. I hope you're having a lovely day. No matter where you're watching from, thanks for joining in on the show. Now, there's a couple of stories I want to get to a bit later on in this episode, and that is, of course, the biggest news, Tucker Carlson and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, their interview, as well as Joe Biden being more exposed to the public as someone with a bit of a decline in his mental ability. So interesting stories I'll get to a bit later on. First up, I wanted to share with you this new science that we're getting from the Australian government, and this is a part of a gender assessment analysis report that has been put out this year by the Australian government, and there's some new terminology in there, and it looks like new science. We're so lucky that we live in this new world where even the most basic of sciences that we've known for the most of our lives, actually the existence of humankind, most of us have known, are evolving and changing, and we're so blessed and lucky to be living in this time. This falls into that category, in my opinion. Now, I can't go into too much detail and give my opinions around this stuff, but I will read this for your benefit. So let's have a look. This is about the definition of sex as it pertains to this report in its glossary. Sex. A person's sex is based upon their sex characteristics, such as their chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. While typically based upon the sex characteristics observed and recorded at birth or infancy, a person's reported sex can change over the course of their lifetime and may differ from their sex recorded at birth. Very interesting way that this has all been phrased around sex. For a long time, when we talk about sex and gender, they would say that gender is something which is a social construct. Actually, let me read the passage about gender. Gender is a social construct and a cultural concept. It is about social and cultural differences in identity, expression, and experiences as a man, woman, or non-binary person. Non-binary is an umbrella term describing gender identities that are not exclusively male or female. All right. I mean, that was kind of the argument for a long time around sex and gender based around these concepts. But does it feel like that kind of concept where sex, the biological sex, is becoming some type of, social construct almost? In this sense, how it's been phrased, I would say you could potentially, your sex would be changing all the time, right? You would be changing from male to female or whatever else thing that they want to put up there all the time. There's no limit on the amount of ways you can change. And it almost, the way that it's phrased, it's almost like a natural phenomenon that is being phrased at. I can't quite get my head around this. I've put this out there to the public to give me some ideas about what's going on here. Maybe I'm looking at all of this wrong. Let me know what you think about this new definition from the Australian government. It's quite mind-boggling if you ask me. Now, on to the biggest news story of the day, and that is, of course, Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. Now, many of you may have already watched it. I think it's almost up to 70 million views on X alone. Now, I don't know how much views he's had on his website where he streamed it or what platform he used, but at least on Twitter, it's almost up to 70 million views. And by the time I put this video up, there'll probably be more, right? This is changing the game when it comes to mainstream media. And this is, I think, why they're terrified of Tucker, Elon Musk, all these type of platforms who are not required. These cable news networks, these mainstream platforms are not required to get out these interviews to the general public, right? There's so much interest in it, and many people are happy to tune in and watch it on social media. And Tucker Carlson doesn't need the backing of like Fox News or any of those companies that he used to work for. He's doing it himself. So just on that fact alone, the interview with Vladimir Putin is so watched by the whole world and so talked about that you don't necessarily need the old traditional legacy media, which is dying out. This may be the death knell for that type of media. Now, I don't want to go to too much analysis over the interview itself because it actually went for 2 hours, right? If you sat there and watched the whole thing, it went for 2 hours. And one of the most interesting parts of the interview, I thought, was just Vladimir Putin's his insistence on sharing history. He really wanted to contextualize his opinions and his views based around his interpretation of history. Now, some people will disagree with how he interpreted the history. Whatever, we're already seeing that people from Ukraine and people from other parts of Europe are not happy with the way that Putin shared his view of certain histories, right? And whatever, that's fine. But I'm saying Vladimir Putin wanted to put it around that context. And I think Tucker Carlson was a little bit taken aback by that at the start when the interview started, because Putin did kind of go on a bit of a, it was almost like one of those YouTube videos where someone explains to you about a history of certain thing, right? Vladimir Putin could have a YouTube channel just giving history analysis, right? And there's a lot of funny memes right now about Vladimir Putin just talking about different types of history, and he even had a book and a folder to give to Tucker. Beyond that, the interview touched on lots of different topics that is not surprising or shocking for those people who follow geopolitical issues, right? Particularly around the war in Ukraine, and particularly around Russia's history with things like the Minsk Agreement, just the whole history of that area. If you're familiar with geopolitics, it's not surprising. But what is new about the interview that Tucker did is, since the invasion of Ukraine, or since the war in Ukraine, or since Russia, defending itself or helping itself, however you want to frame it, depending on which side of this you come from. This is the first time I think Putin has talked to Western press in this manner and this sit-down style interview. So in that sense, these new questions being put to him about, the Nord Stream pipeline, who's responsible, and he said, of course, probably the US, the CIA. He jokingly even referred to it as maybe being Tucker. It was kind of funny moments in there as well. Whatever. So those kind of things people already discussed, but you're hearing the answers now from Putin himself. So if you haven't watched it, I recommend you go watch it, and watch it for what it is. I know a lot of people criticized Tucker before this, saying that he's being treasonous, he's selling out the US, he's selling out the West, and all this kind of stuff. But really, it was a decent interview. There were elements of it where it got a bit combative, in terms of Tucker saying, you've got this journalist from the Wall Street Journal in prison in Russia. Can you release him? Because what he has done shouldn't amount to the type of punishment that he's receiving at Russia's hands. Now, those type of interactions were things that people were saying before the interview that Tucker would not be doing. So he did a lot of that as well. And of course, there's always going to be areas where people are going to criticize Tucker for his interview style and all this kind of stuff. But it is what it is. Watch it. You decide for yourself. I thought, in general, it was a fascinating interview, and it just gave an insight into a different perspective. And whether you have your mind made up about Putin or not, I don't think it's going to sway people like the way that everyone was talking about. But it just gives you that different perspective about where Putin is at, and potentially where the Russian government and those around him are at also. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to journalism. So I won't go too much into detail about what was discussed, but the media reaction has been very interesting. They're trying to frame it around Tucker Carlson lost control of Putin, and Putin completely controlled the interview. So, it's gone from Tucker being a treasonous individual to someone who is an incompetent journalist that was not able to handle Vladimir Putin, who was able to control the entire interview. Let me just read this little bit for you from the BBC. Putin takes charge as TV host gives free rein to Kremlin. Ooh. Vladimir Putin lectured, joked, and occasionally snarled, but not at his host. Tucker Carlson laughed, listened, and then listened some more. During the Americans' much hyped encounter with the Russian president, his fixed, fascinated expression slipped a few times, especially when Putin promised of a 30-second history lesson became a 30-something minute rant. But for the most part, Carlson seemed to lap up what Russian president was telling him. Putin was fully in charge of this encounter, and for large parts of it, its interviewer barely got a word in. Instead of pushing the Russian leader, indicted as a suspected war criminal, on his full-scale invasion of Ukraine and challenge his false assertions, Carlson swerved off piste to talk God and Russian soul. Journalist hostage. The American had touted his sit-down with Putin as a triumph for free speech, asserting that he was heading where no Western news outlet dared to tread. That's untrue. The Kremlin is simply highly selective about who Putin speaks to. Anyway, this is BBC trying to frame the interview in a negative light. You can see there, they're trying to say that Tucker Carlson lost control of the interview. Now, from me watching it, as someone of a non-biased, neutral observer watching from Australia, watching this interview, you know what I got out of it? I got a chance to listen, right? And I think that's what Tucker was doing, letting Putin speak, asking the questions, and sensibly allowing him to answer those questions, even though those questions, some of the answers went on for a while. At least we got a bit more of a context around those answers. There wasn't these attempts at these strategically planned gotchas, because what does that achieve, right? That, I don't think that achieves anything really. What's the point of doing a gotcha question on Putin, right? Especially if you think his credibility is not worth it anyway. If he's an indicted war criminal, Let's hear what he has to say about all these issues in his full, frank answers that he's willing to give the public. And I think that's what Tucker was aiming to do, and I think he achieved that objective if that's what he planned. Now, that's just how I see it. Let me know your thoughts and let me know your opinions. Interestingly, also, we are seeing the EU, of course, they're not going to give up on this. Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin to test EU law regulating tech companies. The EU's far-reaching new laws to regulate tech companies, including X and Facebook, will face their first big test on Thursday night when former Fox News host Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin is aired in the US. A spokesman for the European Commission said it's anticipated that the interview would provide a platform for Putin's twisted desire to reinstate the Russian Empire. We can all assume what Putin might say. I mean, he's a chronic liar, said the EU spokesman for Foreign Affairs. The interview has raised concerns with the EU that it will be used as part of Putin's wider information war, with the likelihood that clips would spread across social media, particularly on Elon Musk's S platform, providing the Russian leader with propaganda coup. However, at the daily press conference of the European Commission, the field made clear that X and other platforms will be obliged to remove illegal content under the Blocks Digital Services Act, which came into force last year. So you can see here the EU, who has been trying to get this stranglehold over companies like X and other social media companies, they've achieved it with almost every other social media company except X. They are saying that they can wield their power if they need to remove some of these content from that interview, the clips which are going viral, right? They can make the demands and orders, and they're not afraid to use this power, right? These guys sound like the very thing that they complain about when it comes to Putin, right? How is this any different from being authoritarian and stifling free speech, right? It is the very thing that they say that they are not. Complete lunacy from these folks. Now, this story, I want to cover it in depth, and this is around Joe Biden, right? Senile old man Joe Biden. And you know what? It's actually been confirmed that he's not all there. Not by anyone else, not by Donald Trump saying something, or not by a doctor, but by the special counsel who is investigating the classified documents case related to him having classified documents in boxes and stuff in his Delaware home garage, right, or in his car or whatever. There was an investigation into that by a special counsel that was set up. Very similar to how they went after Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and I think they're totally different, distinct cases because Trump was the president at the time he had these documents, whereas when Joe Biden had these documents as the vice president, he didn't have the type of declassification power that Trump has as a president. And also, he was a private member of the public when the alleged allegations that he disclosed some of this information potentially to other people, okay? And he shouldn't have had that in the first place because it was a national security risk. So they found all this. They were found that this could be a credible thing that President Biden could be, in fact, charged with, indicted for. But they said because he's a old man with poor memory, that if you put him to a jury or a court, you can't. You got to look at his mental ability to remember things, and for that fact, he would not be able to willfully demonstrate that he has a mental capacity to stand trial for something like this. It is mind-boggling, right? The exact words. I'll read my tweet on this because it kind of has some of the words. A U.S. special counsel has found that Joe Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified documents when he was a private citizen, which was a threat to national security. However, no charges would be laid against him, as his memory had such significant limitations that it would be difficult to convince a jury that the president held a mental state of willfulness that a serious felony requires. The investigators also note that President Biden is a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. This is a special counsel saying that Joe Biden has a poor memory and he's not all there. And yet, even though they can't prosecute him for him based on his poor memory, which is what it reads like, he is fit and proper, according to people that support him and Joe Biden himself, to be sitting right now as the president of the United States of America with the nuclear codes, with all the issues we're seeing in Russia, right? You saw Tucker Carlson interview Putin. You saw Putin's all there when he's talking. He can give you a bloody history lecture, whether you agree with him or not, right? Biden, when you look at Biden, he doesn't know where he is half the time, right? He's falling over. He's all over the place. And you have his own special counsel in America, the justice system, now saying in those documents that he is not all there. Now, that's not even the worst part. The worst part is actually some genius in his staff thought it would be a wise idea to hold a press conference in relation to all of this to answer questions and set the record straight that Joe Biden is fit and sharp like they claim. Right? So he started this press conference and it was a train wreck of a press conference. probably buried his entire presidency, if you ask me. This should end it. This should end it with no questions asked. And the worst part of all of this was he was asked, actually, he came on voluntary and he said that the president of Mexico opened the border in Gaza to let in humanitarian aid in the issue between the conflict between Israel and Palestine, right? He said the president of Mexico opened the border in Egypt. And this is the guy that's coming on to say that he's tactfully sharp. Have a listen to this.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on there.
He's just not all there. He is totally not all there. But you know what? Mainstream media is still trying to defend him. Have a listen to CNN.
Can I just say, I mean, on this point about Mexico, I mean, he misspoke on the name of the country in the context of a larger answer about what he's doing to try to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. So is it a perfect answer? Is it great to misspeak? No, it's never great to misspeak. I promise everybody on this panel right now has misspoken and said the wrong name or the wrong the wrong date in a conversation. But, he's explaining the work that he's doing to try to ease that crisis. And so I think that we should.
How do these people look at themselves, right? How do these people go to work and seriously tell people that this was just an honest little mistake that Biden's made? There are so many instances and examples of him with his cognitive decline where he looks like he belongs in an old people's home. No offense. He's senile old man, or as the special counsel put it, elderly man that has forgetful memories or a loss of memory. How crazy is it that these people are still trying to defend him? Complete and utter shambles, if you ask me. That's it for Biden. There's lots more to this. You can go look it up on my Twitter. I'm sharing everything there at the Real Rukshan on X. You can see a lot of my posts and a lot of the other stuff that I'm resharing as well in relation to this. Now, at the same time, President Donald Trump has triumphed in the Nevada caucuses. I think he's won like 98% of the caucus votes there. And Nikki Haley, of course, she didn't even feature in any of this. And even in the primaries where it was the result didn't matter, she was beaten by none of the above. So Trump is really steamrolling ahead for the Republican nomination. And you're seeing the person he's potentially up against at the moment, Joe Biden, is completely cuckoo. We also have the Colorado case, where they're trying to kick Trump off the ballot right now in the Supreme Court, and you have all the justices, both people who are put in there by Democrats and Republicans, listening to the Colorado dudes, the lawyers, giving their insane arguments about why the state has this case to present about who they can have on their ballots and so on. And even the left-wing, more left-wing judges or Democrat-based judges are questioning this guy, like, are you sure this case belongs here? Are you sure these arguments that you're making even make sense? Are you sure we should even be looking at this case in the Supreme Court? So it looks like this whole ballot thing to do with Trump, that they were really amping up that, oh, Trump is being struck off the ballots. Now that it's at the Supreme Court, it looks like it's going to be laughed out of the court with a massive victory for that case for Donald Trump. That's just what it looks like right now, just based on how the judges are reacting to this. Now, this goes for hours and hours of testimony, so you can listen to that. It's available online, but just from the bits and pieces I've listened to, it's not looking good for Joe Biden and the Democrats if they want to try to win by keeping Trump off the ballot in certain Democrat stronghold states. Anyway, guys, that's my show for today. I hope you've enjoyed what I've been talking about today. If you want to support my work, you can subscribe to my YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Also, you can hit the notification bell and you'll get instant notifications, apparently, when I post videos here on YouTube. You can also follow me on X, Instagram, Facebook, Rumble, Odyssey, at The Real Rukshan, or follow me on my website at www.realrukshan.com. Let me know if you enjoy my focus also on US politics. Sometimes it's really hard to ignore what's happening in the US. One, because it's super funny. There is a crossover with Australia because a lot of the stuff that happens in the US impacts us. But I have a very keen interest in US politics for a long time, and I enjoy covering US politics more so than Australian politics when it comes to these type of massive constitutional issues or major things to do with censorship, because it's just heightened in the US and the impacts are much more than what's felt here. Anyway, guys, see you next time.